The Nuremberg trials. Successful diplomacy is not without consequences. The Nuremberg trials, a revolutionary example of international diplomacy in the aftermath of the Holocaust, quickly showed their importance in human history. These trials succeeded because they revealed the true behaviors of Nazi officials. However, they subsequently failed due to controversies regarding appropriate punishments. World War II began on September 1, 1939, with Germany's invasion of Poland. Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan, the Axis powers, fought against the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, the Allied powers. This war was incredibly brutal, with approximately 75 million casualties, 17 million being Jewish people and other minorities during the Holocaust. Adolf Hitler, leader of the Nazi regime, committed suicide on April 30, 1945. Germany surrendered on May 7th, the end of World War II in Europe. The world rightfully celebrated the end of the tyrannical Nazi Party. However, many Nazi officials were still free. The Allied leaders were left with the inscrutable problem of determining an appropriate way to handle these individuals. Many feared repeating the end of World War I. The Allies forced Germany to give up their land, military, and pay large amounts of money in the 1918 Treaty of Versailles. Germany fell into poverty with a weak government that allowed Adolf Hitler to take power. In October 1943, Franklin Roosevelt of the United States, Winston Churchill of Great Britain, and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union signed the Moscow Declaration of German Atrocities. This document determined that German officials would be tried in the nation they committed their crimes. Those that lacked a specific location for their crimes would be tried by a combination of the Allied governments. On August 8, 1945, the Charter of the International Military Tribunal was announced in London. The German officials would be tried in front of judges from the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Crimes against peace, planning war, crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes, poor treatment of civilians/prisoners, were explicitly mentioned. October 9, 1945, began the initial trials in Nuremberg against 22 living Nazi officials. Many committed suicide or fled, primarily to South America, before they could be tried. Some notable officials tried included Hermann Göring, Hitler's former deputy, and Rudolf Hess, deputy leader of the Nazi Party.
The case we present is a plea of humanity to law.
The right of all people to live in peace and dignity, regardless of their race or creed.
Originally, the trials were supposed to be held in Berlin, but it had been destroyed by warfare. The location was changed to Nuremberg, primarily because of the Nuremberg laws, which greatly restricted Jewish people. Being created in September 1935, they were seen as necessary to stop Jewish people and enact faith in the Nazi Party. This international unrest in the world would unfortunately seem to have given rise to the view amongst the Jews within Germany that the time has come openly to oppose Jewish interests to those of the German nation. A major reason for these trials was to show Germany, along with the rest of the world, what was truly going on during the Nazi regime. During their reign, they tightly controlled all communication in Germany and other occupied nations. Most people and nations were unaware of what occurred during the Holocaust as a result. Allied leaders such as Robert H. Jackson knew the importance of showing their crimes in their true light. Their true job was to both determine the innocence or guilt of the defendants and ensure that the world would never forget their crimes. Unless we write the record of this movement with clarity and precision, we cannot blame the future if in days of peace it finds incredible the accusatory generalities uttered during the war. We must establish incredible events by credible evidence. Robert H. Jackson to President Truman, June 6, 1945. The Nuremberg trials aimed to use physical evidence of their crimes as a way to bring them up to light. Items such as jars of soap using the body fat of prisoners helped show the guilt of many officials. During their time, the Nazi Party took meticulous records of their crimes against humanity. These records, along with other letters/correspondence, were beneficial to use their own words against them. Using official records the Nazis themselves took, the Allies found information about the usage of body parts of inmates. Other primary issues included experimentation with poison gas, malaria, high altitude, and studying the effects of jaundice on prisoners.
In connection with the administration of the concentration camps, the SS embarked on a series of experiments on human beings which were performed on prisoners of war or concentration camp inmates. These experiments included freezing to death and killing by poison bullets.
In all, 216 court sessions occurred. The 22 people heard evidence against them, primarily in the form of their own personal documents, were allowed to call witnesses to the stand and cross-examine those who were brought against them. Nazis primarily attempted to defend themselves by stating that they were only following the orders of their superiors. Some of the highest-ranking people, such as Adolf Hitler and Heinrich Himmler, had already committed suicide and therefore could not be tried. The prosecution held that the specific men who committed the crimes must be punished in the eyes of international law. Another common defense was that these events were not crimes when they were committed. The prosecution held that they were crimes under international law well before World War II even began. By October 1, 1946, the International Military Tribunal had their final verdicts of the initial 22 officials. 12 were sentenced to death, even though one committed suicide and another went missing before they could be hanged. 3 were sentenced to life imprisonment. 4 received prison terms ranging from 10 to 20 years. 3 were acquitted. Similar punishments would follow in other trials. Both during the Nuremberg trials and well afterward, many nations that either were occupied by or collaborated with Nazi Germany held trials. Czechoslovakia, France, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the Soviet Union were a few examples. Many of these trials took place in the Federal Republic of Germany from 1949 to 1990, when West Germany was occupied by the United States, France, and Great Britain. East Germany was occupied by the Soviet Union as a separate entity. Many defendants were acquitted or received remarkably light prison sentences during these trials. Thousands were never punished. The Allies saw re-establishing the German court system as a vital aspect of rebuilding their nation without the Nazi Party's influence. However, post-war trials largely failed in this aspect. In West Germany, former Nazi officials were frequently able to return to their old jobs, including as judges. Their dangerous ideology still had an effect on diplomacy and justice in Germany for decades later as a result. By the 1950s, public interest was swayed from bringing Nazis to justice to concerns about the Cold War. Most trials outside of Germany ended. Those who had not previously been executed were frequently let free from their prison sentences. In 1961, the capture of Adolf Eichmann reignited a desire to see Nazi officials punished for their crimes. Eichmann was a high-ranking official who was instrumental in the deportation and eventual murder of millions of Jewish people. He was sentenced to death on December 15, 1961. The Eichmann trial was revolutionary because it was televised around the world, bringing the true realities of Nazi crimes to a wide audience. Many survivors became more open about their experiences after his true crimes became widely known. Both during and after the Nuremberg trials, many disagreed on how they should be handled. Several prominent leaders in the Allied governments, most notably British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, believed that they should be more extreme and simply execute the Nazis. However, the governments were able to work together and create a system that incorporated each Allied nation. Even though the Allies worked to create a fair trial where defendants had choices and were not tried solely on ambiguous charges, they were still heavily criticized by Germans. The Allied powers wished to show Germany what occurred during the war. Most Germans were unwilling to admit their responsibility for their crimes. A small minority actively resisted Nazi rule. However, the vast majority helped by voting for Hitler and his allies and standing by as their Jewish peers were deported and killed by the thousands. Germans, even soldiers and military officers, frequently downplayed their crimes and knowledge about the Holocaust, despite overwhelming evidence against them. Many stated that they were forced to participate in the Nazi Party, when that was typically not the case. This lack of regret by many accomplices in the Holocaust led to many considering the trials as a failure. Former members of the Nazi Party rejoined German society without any consequences for their actions. High-ranking officials frequently were let free. Talk of the Holocaust as horrific genocide against Jewish people and other minorities was virtually unheard of in West Germany. However, it is impossible to label the Nuremberg trials as solely a success or solely a failure. Despite short sentences and a lack of guilt by the German people, they set a vital precedent for international diplomacy and documentation of Nazi crimes. Future generations would forever see the guilt of the Nazi Party through the prosecution and evidence of the Nuremberg trials.